My son-in-law laughed when he saw me on the 94th floor, my jacket still smelling of arc smoke and burnt steel. "Get this dirty old fool out before the cameras see him," he told my daughter. But 3 minutes later, when the glass beneath his feet began to tremble and 200 guests started screaming, he was not laughing anymore. He was looking for me. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's story. Before we return to the moment I was humiliated on that observation deck, please like, subscribe, and comment where you are watching from. What would you do if the person who called you worthless suddenly needed you to save their life? Note: this is a fictional story. Some details are dramatized to create meaningful and beneficial reflections. The elevator doors opened onto the 94th floor of the Sky Prism, and I stepped into a world that smelled like $1,200 champagne and perfume that cost more per ounce than my monthly heating bill. I was George Kowalski, 63 years old, master welder, third-generation ironworker, from Lawrenceville, Pittsburgh, and I had no business being here. At least not according to the 200 pairs of eyes that turned toward me like I had just crawled out of a blast furnace. My white dress shirt was a canvas of destruction. Metal dust clung to the fabric in silver streaks. A dark smear of hydraulic grease ran across my chest where I had pressed myself beneath a collapsed scaffolding rig. 3 burn holes from welding sparks dotted my left sleeve like cigarette marks. The acrid scent of burnt steel and ozone clung to me like a second skin, cutting through the delicate fragrance of the gala like a blowtorch through silk. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the exact temperature of your own irrelevance? That is what the 94th floor felt like. The observation deck was a cathedral of engineered glass. Floor-to-ceiling panels offered a 360-degree view of Manhattan. The floor itself was transparent in sections, so guests could look straight down 94 stories to the glittering streets below. It was designed to inspire awe. Tonight, standing in my destroyed shirt, it only inspired the cold certainty that I did not belong. Sophie reached me before security could. Her fingers closed around my forearm with the desperate pressure of someone trying to contain a gas leak. Her manicured nails dug through my ruined sleeve, and I could smell her perfume. Something French and expensive that never existed in our Lawrenceville kitchen. "Dad!" Her voice was a whispered scream. "What happened to you? Why do you look like this?" For one heartbeat, I thought she was asking out of concern, but her eyes were not on my wounds. They were darting toward the cluster of cameras near the bar, calculating angles of exposure. "There was an accident, Sophie. A scaffolding collapsed 2 blocks from here. 2 workers were trapped. I had to help them." She was not listening. She was positioning her body between me and the nearest photographer. "Dad, you cannot be here looking like this. Tristan's investors, the media. This is a live broadcast." Then his voice cut through the crowd like a plasma cutter through sheet metal. Well, well. What do we have here? Tristan Mercer. My son-in-law, 37 years old. Celebrity architect. The man whose face had graced Architectural Digest twice before 35. He moved through the crowd with the fluid confidence of someone who had never been told no. His tailored tuxedo catching the light in a way that made him look less like a man and more like a rendering of one. He stopped 5 feet away. His eyes performed a slow, theatrical scan of my appearance, from my steel-toe boots carrying concrete dust, up my stained pants, lingering on my destroyed shirt, and settling on my face with performative disgust. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his arms spreading wide. "It appears we have a visitor from the maintenance department." He turned to the board members near the bar. "I told you the service elevator had a security flaw." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not the warm kind, the surgical kind. Tristan stepped closer. His voice, a conspiratorial stage, whisper loud enough for every microphone to capture. "Honestly, Sophie, I thought we discussed this. I thought you said he was not coming." Sophie stood paralyzed between her father and her husband. I watched which direction her body leaned. Away from me. Tristan turned back, emboldened by her silence. Let me be blunt, old man. This is a $1.2 billion launch. There are cameras from CNN, Bloomberg, and The Times in this room. You look like you crawled out of a furnace. Whatever blue-collar emergency you wandered in from, it does not belong on my observation deck. He leaned in. His voice dropping to a register meant only for me, though his personal camera blinked red on the pillar behind him. This dirty old fool should not be here. I stood perfectly still, my calloused hands hanging at my sides, still carrying the heat of the emergency welds I had performed 30 minutes ago to free a 22-year-old kid from under 800 pounds of collapsed steel. I had saved 2 lives tonight, and now I was being audited by a man who had never lifted anything heavier than a cocktail glass. But as Sophie's hand pushed me toward the service corridor, I felt something beneath my boots that made the humiliation vanish from my mind completely. A vibration. Subtle. Rhythmic. Wrong. It was not the HVAC system. It was not the wind against the glass. It was a frequency I had felt exactly twice in 40 years. Once on the Allegheny River Bridge in '94, 6 minutes before a support beam cracked, and once on the Monongahela crossing in 2008, 40 seconds before a weld joint failed and dropped 16 tons of concrete into the river. It was the sound of structural steel, losing faith in the man who had assembled it. But before I tell you how a glass floor nearly became a coffin for 200 people, I need to take you back. 5 years back, to a room that smelled of antiseptic and lavender lotion, where the only woman I ever loved was forgetting my name for the last time. The Greenfield Memory Care Center sat on a quiet hill in Pittsburgh's East End, a brick building with cheerful yellow curtains that could not disguise what it truly was. A place where people went to dissolve. Rose Kowalski, my wife of 34 years, had been dissolving for 3 of them. Alzheimer's does not kill you all at once. It is not a weld that snaps clean. It is rust. Slow, patient, invisible rust that eats the structure from the inside until one morning the entire bridge just folds into the river without warning. I watched it consume Rose one memory at a time. First, the little things. Where she put the car keys. Whether she had eaten lunch. Then the bigger things. Our address. Her sister's name. The way to the bathroom in a house she had lived in for 28 years. By December of 2020, she did not know where she was most days. But she still knew my hands. Even when my face became a stranger's, she would reach for my fingers and hold them against her cheek, feeling the calluses like she was reading Braille. Those rough spots were the last map she had left to the life we built together. Have you ever sat beside someone you love and watched them search your face for a recognition that no longer exists? It is a specific kind of helplessness that no amount of expertise can fix. I could stabilize a fractured truss in a thunderstorm. I could not stop my wife's mind from collapsing. That final Tuesday in January, the nurses called me at 4 a.m. The voice on the phone carried that particular gentleness that medical professionals use when they are preparing you to let go. I drove through the dark Pittsburgh streets with my hands shaking on the wheel, the heater broken, my breath forming clouds in the cab of my truck. When I arrived, Rose was propped up on pillows, her silver hair fanned out like a halo that had lost its shine. Her eyes were open, which was rare those final weeks. And they were clear. That was rarer still. Georgie. She said my name like she was unwrapping a gift she had forgotten she owned. Her voice was thin as copper wire, but it was hers. Fully hers. The fog had lifted for one final merciful window. I am here, Rosie. I pulled the chair close, wrapping both my hands around her fingers. They felt like paper folded too many times, fragile and translucent in the gray morning light. Is Sophie coming? She asked, her eyes searching the doorway with a desperate hope that broke something in my chest. She is coming, I lied. The truth was that Sophie had not visited in 6 weeks. She was busy with a new boyfriend in New York, a man I had not yet met. She had promised to come last Sunday and canceled 3 hours before. I did not tell Rose that. I could not add that weight to her final hours. Rose smiled then. A small, knowing curve that told me she could still read me better than any blueprint I had ever studied. You are lying, Georgie. But you are lying with love. So, I will allow it. She squeezed my hand with a strength that startled me. Her eyes suddenly fierce with the clarity of someone delivering their last testament. Listen to me carefully. I need you to promise me something. Anything, Rosie. Anything. Sophie is going to reach for bright things. She always has. Even as a little girl, she reached for the shiniest object in the room. But shiny is not always strong, Georgie. You know that better than anyone. Sometimes the prettiest weld is the weakest one. It looks perfect on the surface, but it has no penetration, no root. Her breathing grew shallow. Each inhale a small battle against the gravity that was pulling her down. Do not let her world go dark, she whispered, her grip tightening with a force that seemed borrowed from somewhere beyond her failing body. Even if she pushes you away, even if she forgets where she came from, you keep the fire burning for her. Promise me, Georgie. Promise me. You will be her foundation, even when she cannot see you holding her up. I promise, Rose. I pressed my lips to her knuckles, tasting salt and lotion and the faint metallic trace of the rings she could no longer wear, because her fingers had grown too thin. I will keep her in the light, no matter what it costs me. She relaxed then, her eyes softening, drifting toward the window where the first gray light of a Pittsburgh dawn was struggling through the overcast. The machines around her beeped in a rhythm that was slowing, the intervals stretching like a clock running out of spring. Tell her I loved the macaroni necklace, Rose murmured, her voice already halfway between this world and whatever comes after. Second grade. Purple beads. I still have it in my jewelry box. Tell her that was my favorite diamond. I will tell her, Rosie. I will tell her everything. The line went flat at 6:47 in the morning, a long mechanical tone that signaled the end of 34 years of partnership and the beginning of a debt I would spend the next 5 years trying to pay in overtime and silence. I sat there holding a hand that was already cooling, listening to the Pittsburgh wind rattle the windows, and made a second silent promise to myself. Whatever Sophie needed, whatever it took to keep her world bright, I would give it, even if it meant standing alone in the dark so she could stand in the sun. Sophie arrived 4 hours later, breathless and smelling of airport coffee. She cried. She held her mother's cold hand. She told me she was sorry. I believed her then. I did not know that keeping my daughter in the light would mean burying myself so deep in the dark that even my own granddaughter would not know my name. I did not know that the promise I made to a dying woman would become the chain that let others drag me through 5 years of silence and theft and erasure. But even if I had known, I would have made it anyway, because that is what Kowalski men do. We hold the weight, even when the structure above us has forgotten we exist. 16 months after I buried Rose, I stood on a manicured lawn in Lower Manhattan, watching my daughter cross a stage in a cap and gown that had cost me 2 years of double shifts and a second mortgage I never told her about. It was May of 2021, and the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and the kind of optimism that only graduation ceremonies can manufacture. Sophie Kowalski. The announcer's voice rang across the courtyard. Bachelor of Fine Arts, Interior Design. Magna cum laude. I clapped until my calloused palms burned. The parents around me wore linen blazers and designer sunglasses, their applause polite and measured. Mine was the loudest in the row, the rough percussion of a working man's pride echoing off the brownstone walls of the campus. A woman in front of me turned with a tight smile that said everything about volume and class without using a single word. I did not care. My girl had made it. Rose's girl had made it. I thought of the 16-hour shifts at the rail yard, the emergency calls at 2 in the morning, when a cracked beam needed stabilizing before the morning commuter rush, the 3 fingers on my left hand that had lost full sensation after an arc flash in 2018, every spark, every burn, every night. I came home too exhausted to eat, had been a deposit into this moment. And watching her walk across that stage with her chin held high was the only receipt I ever needed. Have you ever felt so proud of someone that it physically hurts? Like your chest is a furnace running too hot, and if you do not release the pressure, something vital is going to crack. That was me on that lawn, burning with a father's pride that had nowhere to go except into my stinging eyes. After the ceremony, Sophie pushed through the crowd toward me, her face glowing. "Dad, I did it. Can you believe it?" I pulled her into a hug that lifted her off the ground, not caring about the wrinkles it put in her gown. "Your mother is doing backflips up there right now, Sophie. I promise you that." She laughed, and for a moment she was 12 years old again, handing me wrenches in the garage while I taught her the difference between a MIG bead and a TIG bead. For that single embrace, everything I had sacrificed was worth it. Then she stepped back, and her eyes shifted to something behind me. Or rather, someone. "Dad, there is someone I want you to meet." He appeared like a man who had been waiting for his cue. Tristan Mercer. 36 at the time, though he carried himself with the self-assurance of someone who had been running boardrooms since birth. Tall, angular, a jawline that looked like it had been designed by the same software he used to render his buildings. His charcoal suit was tailored so precisely that it seemed to reject the very concept of wrinkles, as if the fabric itself had been intimidated into compliance. "Tristan, this is my dad. Dad, this is Tristan. He is an architect." Sophie's voice carried a new pitch of pride I had not heard before. A reverence, almost. Tristan extended his hand. His grip was firm but calculated, the kind of handshake taught in business seminars rather than learned through years of gripping steel. His palm was smooth, not a callus, not a scar, not a single ridge of earned roughness. It was the hand of a man who had never built anything with his own body. "George," he said, his smile revealing teeth so white they looked engineered. "Sophie has told me so much about you. A master welder? Is that right?" He tilted his head with the curiosity of an anthropologist encountering a primitive tool. "How fascinating. A dying art, really. There is something almost romantic about men who still work with their hands in the physical world." He said it the way you might compliment a horse-drawn carriage. Charming, historic, completely obsolete. I wanted to tell him that every skyscraper he had ever drawn on a screen was held together by the hands he had just called romantic. That without welders, his glass towers were nothing but expensive sand waiting to collapse. But Sophie was watching me with an expression I recognized. It was the same look Rose used to give me when she needed me to swallow my pride for the sake of peace. So I swallowed. "It is good to meet you, Tristan. Sophie seems happy. That is all that matters to me." He smiled again, that perfect architectural smile, and then he did something small that I have never forgotten. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a silk pocket square, and wiped his palm, gently, casually, as if he were brushing away a spot of dust rather than erasing the residue of my existence from his skin. Sophie did not notice. Or perhaps she chose not to. Over dinner that evening at a restaurant where the menu had no prices, a detail that made my stomach tighten with the anxiety of invisible debt, Tristan spoke at length about disruption and spatial narratives, and the post-industrial reimagining of urban density. His vocabulary was a fortress, designed to make outsiders feel exactly that. Outside. I tried once to enter the conversation. I mentioned the Allegheny River Bridge rehabilitation I had completed the previous year. 14 months of structural welding in conditions that would have sent most men home after the first ice storm. Tristan listened with his head slightly tilted, the same way a museum visitor regards a placard explaining an artifact. "That is incredible, George." He swirled his wine with practiced nonchalance. "It is like hearing from the last blacksmith. There is a nobility in manual legacy, even as the world moves past it." Sophie nodded along, her fingers tapping notes into her phone. "Tristan is right, Dad. The future is about digital fabrication now. Robotic welding. The human hand is becoming more of a reference point than a necessity. I looked at my daughter, at the woman I had forged through decades of heat and patience, and watched her try on another man's language like a borrowed coat. It did not fit her yet, but she was determined to make it. I shook his hand and felt nothing but soft skin and cold ambition. In 40 years of welding, I had learned one truth that no architecture degree could teach. A joint is only as strong as the metal you feed it. And this man, beneath the polish and the vocabulary and the engineered jaw, was hollow steel. The wrought iron gates of the Mercer estate did not just open. They parted with the slow mechanical arrogance of a mouth preparing to swallow something beneath its station. I drove my truck through that gap in July of 2021, the engine rattling against the manicured silence of Westchester County like a confession nobody wanted to hear. The driveway was crushed white limestone, a quarter-mile of it, winding through landscaped hedges shaped with the kind of precision that costs more per year than my entire property tax. My tires crunched over those stones like bones grinding under a weight they were never meant to bear. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and straightened the collar of my best flannel shirt, the one with no burn holes, the one Rose used to say made my eyes look like the sky over the Allegheny in October. It was not enough. I knew that before I turned off the engine. Sophie had invited me to a Sunday brunch to officially meet Tristan's family. She had called it casual, relaxed, just a simple meal to get everyone acquainted. But the 3 follow-up texts she sent that morning told a different story. Do not mention the union, Dad. Do not talk about the rail yard. And please, please, do not bring up Pittsburgh unless they ask first. I should have heard those instructions for what they were. Not guidance. Conditions. Vanessa Mercer was waiting on the front steps, positioned like a museum docent preparing to manage an unruly visitor. 65 years old, silver hair sculpted into a helmet of affluence, pearls resting against a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my truck's transmission. She extended her hand with a smile that was geometrically perfect and thermally dead. You must be George. Her voice was silk wrapped around a razor blade. Sophie tells us you work with your hands. How wonderfully tactile. I am a master welder, ma'am, I replied, keeping my back straight and my voice level. Structural ironwork, bridges, high rises, heavy infrastructure. 40 years in the trade. She tilted her head the same way Tristan had at that dinner. The same angle. The same performed curiosity. I realized then it was a family posture, inherited like the estate itself. How fascinating. She led me through a foyer of Italian marble and fresh orchids. You know, my grandfather employed dozens of men like you during the construction of our family's original properties. He always spoke highly of the laboring classes. Such honest simplicity. Ever notice how the word simple is used like a weapon by people who have never had to solve a problem with their bare hands? Vanessa wielded it with the precision of a woman who had spent decades perfecting the art of condescension without ever technically saying anything rude. The brunch table was set on a sun-drenched terrace overlooking a lawn so green it looked artificial. Sterling silver gleamed with military precision. Crystal water glasses caught the morning light and scattered it like diamonds across the white linen. I sat down and immediately felt the weight of my own hands, scarred and thick-knuckled, resting beside a butter knife that was worth more than my weekly paycheck. Tristan sat at the head of the table, his posture radiating ownership of everything within his sightline, including my daughter. Sophie was positioned at his right, her back straight, her laugh pitched half an octave higher than the one I raised. She was performing, and she was getting better at it. The conversation orbited around architecture, philanthropy, and the summer plans of people whose calendars included Tuscany and the Hamptons. I listened for an opening, a crack in the wall where I might insert something real. When Vanessa asked about my interests, I mentioned my workshop, the restoration of vintage welding equipment, the beauty of a perfectly laid bead on structural steel. Vanessa set down her mimosa with the delicacy of someone handling evidence. A hobby forge. How quaint. She smiled at Tristan. It is refreshing, is it not? To meet someone who still uses fire for a living, there is something almost prehistoric about it, like meeting a blacksmith at a technology conference. The table laughed. Soft, polished, practiced laughter. Sophie's laugh was among them. Not the loudest, but present. A small betrayal that cut deeper than any insult Vanessa could construct. I gripped the heavy silverware, my knuckles whitening. There is nothing prehistoric about structural welding. Mrs. Mercer. I kept my voice steady, though the heat in my chest was building toward dangerous pressure. Without it, this house is just a very expensive pile of stones waiting for gravity to win. Vanessa did not blink. She simply lifted her mimosa, took a delicate sip, and redirected the conversation toward Tristan's upcoming museum project as though I had not spoken at all. I had been dismissed, not with anger or confrontation, but with something far worse. Irrelevance. After brunch, Sophie walked me to my truck. The limestone crunched beneath her new heels as she matched my pace, her arms crossed against her chest. She waited until we were far enough from the terrace windows before she spoke. Dad, please. Next time we have dinner with them, could you not wear the flannel? She was looking at the ground, not at me. And maybe do not mention the union or the bridges. It makes Vanessa uncomfortable. She thinks manual labor is a bit. She searched for a word that would not break us both. Intense. You want me to pretend I am someone else, Sophie. I just want them to see the best version of you, Dad. The version that fits here. I looked at my daughter. At the woman I had raised on sparks and steel and the smell of Rose's pot roast after a 12-hour shift. She was asking me to sand off every rough edge that made me who I was. She was asking me to become smooth, like Tristan's palms, like Vanessa's smile, like the limestone beneath our feet that had been crushed into submission. She did not look at me when she asked me to erase myself. She just adjusted her new pearl earrings, the ones Vanessa had given her as a welcome gift, and walked back toward the glow of the Mercer estate. I stood in the driveway dark, my truck smelling of honest metal and motor oil, and felt the first hairline fracture form in the bond between my daughter and me. In June of 2022, I walked my daughter down an aisle lined with 10,000 white peonies and felt less like a father giving away his child and more like a delivery man handing off a package to the wrong address. The venue was a private estate in Westchester, not the Mercer property, but something even grander, a converted 19th century manor with cathedral ceilings and gardens that stretched toward the horizon like a green ocean of inherited wealth. I had spent 6 weeks making her wedding gift. A steel sculpture, 12 inches tall, 2 hands intertwined, one rough and calloused, one smooth and delicate, forged from reclaimed railroad steel that I had salvaged from the same Pittsburgh yard where my grandfather once worked. I had welded each finger joint individually, polishing the metal until it caught the light like frozen mercury. Inside the base, I had engraved a line Rose used to say, "The strongest bonds are forged in fire." I had also quietly handed Sophie $8,000 3 months before the wedding. For the dress, I told her. The one she said made her feel like she belonged in Vanessa's world. She had taken the envelope with a mix of relief and a guilt so brief, I almost missed it. She kissed my cheek. She said I should not have. Her fingers gripped the cash like a lifeline. The aisle was 90 feet of white silk runner, and every step I took beside Sophie felt like a countdown. Her arm in mine was stiff, formal, a connection maintained for the optics of tradition rather than the gravity of love. She smiled for the cameras. She did not look at me once during that walk. Her eyes were locked on Tristan at the altar, on the future she was purchasing, with my silence and my savings. After the vows were exchanged, a young man in a crisp waistcoat appeared at my elbow. "Table 14, sir." He pointed toward a spot so far from the head table that I needed to crane my neck past a marble pillar to catch a glimpse of my own daughter. Table 14 was positioned between the kitchen service door and the emergency exit. The sound of industrial dishwashers clattered through the wall behind me, mixing with the clink of fine crystal from the world I had just been exiled from. I sat there with 3 strangers who turned out to be the caterer's accountant, a distant cousin nobody could place, and an elderly aunt who had been quietly forgotten by both families. Have you ever been a ghost at your own family's celebration? Not invisible by accident, but by design? That is what Table 14 was. A storage closet for the people who did not fit the aesthetic. When the speeches began, I leaned forward, waiting for my name. The father of the bride. The man who had spent 63 years building things that lasted. Tristan spoke first, thanking his parents for their vision and their legacy. Then Sophie rose, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of a woman delivering a keynote rather than addressing her family. She thanked Vanessa for her guidance. She thanked Richard Holt, Tristan's business partner, for believing in their future. She thanked her design school professors. She thanked the event planner. She thanked the florist. She did not say my name. Not once. 30 years of fatherhood. 16-hour shifts. A second mortgage. $8,000 for a dress. And I was not worth a single sentence in her wedding speech. The father-daughter dance came next, announced with the perfunctory enthusiasm of a box being checked rather than a moment being honored. Sophie took my hand on the dance floor, her fingers cold and performative in mine. The professional cameras flashed in a blinding barrage, turning the world into white static. I leaned in, searching for the girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after a long day in the workshop. Your mother would have loved these gardens, Sophie. I whispered it like a prayer, hoping the memory of Rose might crack through her new armor. Her jaw tightened. Please, Dad. Not now. Tristan's investors are watching. We need to maintain the narrative. What narrative? She pulled back slightly, her eyes scanning the room for witnesses. I told Tristan you were a retired design consultant, a freelance spatial planner. It was easier than explaining the reality. The reality. The word hit me like a slag burn. The reality was calloused hands and overtime pay, and a second mortgage, and a promise made to a dying woman. The reality was Table 14, and a nameless speech, and a daughter who had rewritten her own history to erase the man who built its foundation. The dance lasted 2 minutes and 40 seconds. I counted. It felt like a transaction, rather than a tradition. When the music ended, she released my hand with the relief of someone dropping a weight they had been forced to carry for appearance's sake. I could not stay for the cake. I could not watch them toast to a future that had been constructed on the erasure of my existence. I found Sophie near the partners' table, her face wearing the exhaustion of someone who had been performing all day. I am going to head out, Sophie. I said it quietly, not wanting to cause a scene. Oh. She did not look surprised. Okay. She was already looking past me. Tristan's driver can arrange a car for you. We are a bit swamped with the investors right now. I walked toward the parking lot, my rented shoes pinching my feet, my heart a cold weight in my chest. That is when I saw it. Near the service dumpster behind the kitchen tent, half covered by a garbage bag, the steel sculpture I had forged over 6 weeks of pre-dawn mornings was lying on its side. One of the hands had broken off during disposal, the smooth, delicate one, leaving only the rough, calloused hand reaching upward toward nothing. I picked it up. The metal was still warm from the summer sun, or maybe from the kitchen heat radiating through the dumpster wall. I held it against my chest the way I used to hold Sophie when she was small enough to carry. And I walked to my truck. I drove 5 hours back to Pittsburgh that night with the broken sculpture in the passenger seat. The hand I had made to represent my daughter was gone. Only mine remained. Reaching, holding nothing. A man can survive being overlooked. He can even survive being forgotten. But there is a specific kind of death that happens when your own child decides that your existence is incompatible with the life she is building. It is not a clean break. It is a fracture that keeps spreading, silent and slow, until one morning you wake up and realize the entire structure has been condemned. The knock came at 11 on a Tuesday night in October, 3 months after the wedding. Rain was hammering the Lawrenceville streets hard enough to make the gutters sing. And I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my bank's website, watching my savings account balance glow like a fading ember. $4,700 for a 63-year-old man with bad knees and a second mortgage. It was not a safety net. It was a prayer. When I opened the door, Sophie was standing on my porch in a designer raincoat that cost more than my monthly groceries, her mascara running in thin black rivers down cheeks that were already wet before the rain touched them. She looked smaller than she had at the wedding, younger. More like the girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms than the woman who had hidden my sculpture in a dumpster. "Dad, I need help." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I felt 30 years of fatherhood override every rational warning firing in my brain. I stepped aside. "Come in, Sophie. Tell me what is wrong." She sat at my kitchen table, the one Rose and I had bought at a garage sale in 1992. And she told me a story about Tristan's architecture firm. A new project, a revolutionary design studio that would establish their brand internationally, pre-IPO funding. Investor momentum. All the vocabulary I had heard Tristan deploy like camouflage over substance. But then, she said the number. $55,000, Dad. That is all they need to close the round. Tristan's partners are putting in their shares, but we are short. If we do not have it by Friday, the whole thing collapses. Everything we have built falls apart. 55,000. I repeated the number slowly, feeling each digit land on my chest like a hammer strike. Sophie, that is my entire retirement fund. That is 40 years of overtime. Every double shift. Every holiday I worked so you could have Christmas presents under the tree. I know, Dad. She reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers soft and desperate against my scarred knuckles. I would not ask if there was any other way. This is about our future, mine and Lily's. Lily, my granddaughter, 18 months old at the time, a child I had only seen in photographs because Sophie always had a reason to postpone visits. The mention of that name was the key that unlocked the vault. I thought of Rose. The promise. Keep her in the light. Do not let her world go dark. I thought of my daughter standing on my porch in the rain, crying, needing her father the way she had not needed me since she was small enough to carry. Would you hand over the only safety net you have to a person who only remembers you exist when the bill comes due? I did. God help me. I did. My hand shook as the pen met the paper. The rain drummed a frantic rhythm against the window like a warning I chose to ignore. I signed the check for $55,000. Every cent I had saved for the years when my body would finally refuse to climb another scaffold. You will have it back by Christmas, Dad. She clutched the check against her chest. With interest. I promise. Do not worry about interest, Sophie. I said, feeling a hollow lightness spreading through my chest like a weld that had lost its filler. Just come visit more. Bring Lily. Let me know her. She nodded fast, already pulling on her coat, already moving toward the door and the life that had no room for me except as a funding source. She kissed my cheek. A quick, mechanical press of lips that tasted like obligation. Then she was gone, her headlights sweeping across my kitchen wall as she pulled away, taking my future with her. Christmas came. No money, no visit, no phone call until December 28th, when a text arrived at 11:45 at night. Crazy month, Dad. Talk soon. Happy holidays. Have you ever stared at two words on a screen and felt your entire life's work dissolve into digital ash? Happy holidays. 2 words for 40 years of sacrifice. January passed. Then February. I checked my account daily, watching the balance hover near zero while the heating bills climbed. I started skipping meals on Wednesdays and Fridays to keep the mortgage current. I sold Rose's engagement ring in March for $1,400, a transaction that felt like pulling out my own spine. Then the algorithm delivered justice's cruelest messenger. A social media notification. Tristan Mercer, grinning beside a matte black Porsche in front of a Tribeca building I did not recognize. The caption read, New keys. New chapter. New altitude. The building was a luxury condominium. I searched the listing. Studio penthouses, starting at $750,000. Minimum down payment, $55,000. My retirement. My knees. My dead wife's ring. All of it. Converted into a door code for a penthouse I would never be invited to enter. I called Sophie. The phone rang 7 times before she answered, her voice clipped and guarded. Dad, I am in the middle of something. Sophie, I saw the penthouse. I saw Tristan's post. That money was not for a studio. Was it? Her silence lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds that confirmed everything. You are being paranoid, Dad. She said it with the flat, rehearsed delivery of someone who had prepared this response in advance. The studio investment is separate from our living arrangement. You do not understand how capital works at this level. Stop monitoring my life like a stalker. I just need a fraction back, Sophie. 2,000. I am behind on the mortgage. The heating is. Dad. Stop. Her voice sharpened into a blade. Tristan says you are creating a toxic dynamic. He says your financial anxiety is affecting my focus. We need space. Real space. I will reach out when things stabilize. The call ended. 3 seconds of dead air. Then silence. I sat in my kitchen in the dark because the electricity bill was past due. And I understood with a terrible clarity that I had not invested in my daughter's future. I had purchased my own disappearance. Over the next 2 years, the silence grew until it became the only furniture left in my house. The phone calls stopped entirely by spring of 2023. Sophie changed her last name from Kowalski-Mercer to simply Mercer on every public platform. My daughter had surgically removed the only piece of me she still carried. On Thanksgiving 2023, I cooked a single turkey breast and set a place for Rose's photograph. On Christmas, I received a pre-printed card from the Mercers. No personal note, just a family photo and matching white sweaters and the name Sophie Mercer printed in gold foil. My daughter had not just moved away. She had deleted me from the source code of her life. And the password to get back in cost more than I had left to give. There is a sound that only exists at 2 in the morning in an empty house. It is not silence. Silence would be a mercy. It is the sound of absence pressing against the walls. The tick of a clock measuring time that nobody else is sharing with you. The creak of floorboards settling under the weight of nothing. That was the soundtrack of my life by the summer of 2024. But beneath it, night after night, I added a new sound. The ring of hammer against steel. My workshop occupied the basement of the Lawrenceville house. It was a modest space. Concrete floor. Pegboard walls lined with tools my grandfather had handed down. A ventilation hood I had installed myself in '97, and a forge I had built from salvaged firebrick. Rose used to call it my cathedral. She was not wrong. It was the one place left on earth where my hands still mattered. I had learned through a mutual friend that Lily was turning 5 in September. My granddaughter, a child whose face I had only seen in social media photographs, always angled away or partially obscured, as if Sophie was afraid that even a digital image of Lily near my name might contaminate the Mercer brand. I knew Lily had blonde curls. I knew she had Rose's stubborn chin. I knew she existed in a world 94 miles away that had been carefully constructed to exclude me, but I refused to be a ghost to her. Not yet. Not while my hands could still shape metal into meaning. I began the Phoenix in June. Not a toy. Not a trinket. A legacy. In miniature. 18 inches tall. Forged from reclaimed structural steel. I had salvaged from the decommissioned Homestead Works. The same mill where my great-grandfather had poured his life into the bones of this city. Every feather was individually cut, shaped, and welded into place. I spent entire nights on a single wing, filing each barb until it caught the light with a razor sharpness that made the bird look like it was mid-flight. Have you ever poured your entire soul into something that might never be received? It is an act of faith that borders on madness. But madness was all I had left. Inside the body of the Phoenix, I installed a small electrical circuit, 12 grain of wheat bulbs, wired in parallel, each one nestled behind a translucent amber resin panel I had cast to mimic the glow of flame. When the hidden switch beneath the tail was pressed, the entire bird ignited from within. Golden light poured through the feathers, casting wing-shaped shadows across the walls like a sunrise contained in steel. And in the hollow of the bird's chest, accessible only through a tiny hinged panel disguised as a breast feather, I hid a photograph. Rose holding baby Sophie in the kitchen of this very house. 1993. Both of them laughing at something I had said, though I could no longer remember the joke. Only the joy survived. That photograph was my message in a bottle. A quiet anchor for Lily to find one day. Proof that she came from warmth and laughter, and a woman with Rose's exact eyes. By September, the Phoenix was complete. I had not slept more than 4 hours a night in 3 months. My hands were a constellation of fresh burns and filed-down calluses. But when I pressed that switch in the dark of my workshop and watched the golden light explode from within the steel wings, I felt something I had not felt in 2 years. Purpose. I picked up the phone in my kitchen and dialed Sophie's number. It rang 5 times. 6. 7. I was preparing for voicemail when her voice appeared, flat and administrative. Dad. What is it? Not a question. A checkpoint. Sophie. It is Lily's birthday next week. I have something for her. Something I made. I've been working on it since June. It is a sculpture. A phoenix. It lights up from inside. I wired it myself. I was going to ask if I could bring it in person, maybe see her, even for just, Dad. She cut through my words like a cold chisel through copper. We have already discussed this. The party has a Nordic minimalist theme. There is a photographer coming from the city. We cannot have handmade industrial pieces in the visual narrative. It does not align with the brand. Sophie. It is a birthday gift. From her grandfather. I am not asking to redesign the party. I just want to give my granddaughter something I built with my own hands. The silence that followed was heavier than any beam I had ever lifted. When she spoke again, her voice carried a new coldness that I had not heard before. A finality. Dad, Lily does not know you live here. She paused, and I could hear her breathing, measuring each word before releasing it. We told her, you live far away, in Poland, with family. It was easier, for everyone. The floor tilted beneath my feet. Easier. The word tasted like iron filings on my tongue. Easier than what? Than explaining that her grandfather lives 5 hours away and loves her more than his own life? Than admitting you have a father who works with fire instead of spreadsheets? Do not make this difficult, Dad. Her voice was already retreating, pulling away from the conversation like a ship cutting its anchor. Just mail it. We will put it in the attic for later. Later. The word echoed in my workshop long after she hung up. Later meant never. Later meant a dusty corner, where inconvenient truths go to die quietly. I stood in the dark for a long time, the phoenix glowing on my workbench like a heart that refused to stop beating for a family that had stopped listening for its pulse. I mailed it anyway. I wrapped it in 3 layers of bubble wrap and packed it into a reinforced crate I built specifically for the journey. I carried the weight to the Lawrenceville post office, my joints protesting as I hoisted it onto the industrial scale. Fragile, the clerk asked. More than you know, I replied. I watched her slap the yellow sticker onto the side and hand me a tracking number. That 9-digit code became the only tether I had left to my granddaughter. I paid the shipping fee with coins I had been saving in Rose's old mason jar, the one she used to keep on the kitchen windowsill for rainy day ice cream runs. 3 days later. Delivered. Signed for. The notification glowed on my phone like a small emergency. I waited. 1 hour. 6 hours. 2 days. I imagined Lily finding the switch. pressing it, watching the gold light pour through steel feathers. I imagined her discovering the photograph of Rose. The reply came on day 4. A text message from Sophie's number. Package received. Thanks. 7 characters. No photograph. No video. No warmth. And when I checked the message details, I saw the small digital signature at the bottom, sent via automated assistant. My daughter had not even typed the words herself. My 3 months of fire and steel and sleepless devotion had been acknowledged by a machine. I stood in my workshop that night, the only phoenix left now just a memory of golden light. My granddaughter was 5 years old and growing up believing I lived in another country. I was not being forgotten. I was being actively erased, not with violence or anger, but with something far more efficient. Silence. Automation. The quiet bureaucracy of a family that had decided I was a file to be archived rather than a person to be loved. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning in early December, carried by a courier in a uniform that cost more than anything hanging in my closet. I was in the kitchen, eating oatmeal because the grocery budget no longer included eggs, when the doorbell rang with a crispness that did not belong on my Lawrenceville porch. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with a textured weave that felt like money pressed into paper. The return address bore a gold-embossed logo I recognized from Tristan's social media posts. Sky Prism, the billion-dollar observation tower at Hudson Yards that every architecture magazine had been fawning over for 18 months. I turned the envelope in my hands, half expecting it to be a mistake, a misdelivered piece of someone else's life, accidentally landing in mine. I opened it at the kitchen table, the same table where Sophie had sat 3 years ago, with rain in her hair and $55,000 worth of lies on her tongue. Inside was a VIP pass printed on metallic silver paper, a formal program for the grand opening gala on December 12th, and a handwritten note on personal stationery. Dad, it is time to move past the misunderstandings. Tristan really wants you there to share in our success. This is a new chapter for all of us. Please come. Sophie. I read those words 4 times. Each reading produced a different chemical reaction in my chest. The first was hope, raw and desperate, like oxygen, hitting a dying ember. The second was suspicion, the same instinct that makes you check a weld twice when the metal feels too eager to fuse. The third was the memory of Rose's voice, keep her in the light, pulling me forward despite every scar. The fourth was simple gravity, the weight of a father's love that refuses to stop falling toward his child no matter how many times the ground disappears beneath him. Have you ever received an invitation and felt simultaneously rescued and condemned? Like someone had thrown you a rope that might also be a noose. That was this envelope. This golden, heavy, impossibly expensive envelope. I looked at the pile of past due notices on the counter, the red stamps on the electric bill, the second mortgage statement with its bold printed warning. Then I looked back at the gold embossed logo and the words, share in our success. Maybe this was it. Maybe Tristan's success finally meant a return to the family table. Maybe the 55,000 would come home. Maybe Lily would learn that Poland was a lie, and her grandfather had been here all along, 5 hours away, waiting with a phoenix that still glowed in the dark. Hope is a dangerous fuel. You keep feeding it into the furnace, expecting warmth, only to realize the entire structure has been running on fumes. But I could not stop myself. A father's heart always leaves a back door unlocked for the child who keeps taking the silver. I decided to go. And if I was going to stand in a room with CNN cameras and Tristan's board of directors, I would stand there looking like a man worth respecting. The next morning, I walked 3 blocks through the cold to Stasiu's barbershop on Polish Hill. The shop was a relic of the old neighborhood. All chrome chairs and Bayrum aftershave and sports radio crackling from a transistor said older than me. Stasiu Bartkowski had been cutting my hair since 1986. He had seen it go from coal black to iron gray to the tired silver it was now. Going somewhere important, Georgie? He asked. tilting my head with a firm, practiced hand. The straight razor gleamed under the fluorescent light. "You have not asked for the full treatment since Rose's funeral. My daughter's big night, Stasiu." I watched my reflection in the mirror, searching for the man Rose once loved beneath the exhaustion and the years. "I need to look like I belong somewhere I have never been invited before." Stasiu nodded, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror with a knowing weight. He did not ask follow-up questions. Old neighborhood men understood that some battles required armor, not explanations. He gave me the closest shave I had felt in years, the blade so precise against my skin that I felt reborn with each stroke. Back at the house, I pulled the ironing board from the hall closet and set my best white dress shirt across it. The rhythmic hiss of steam against cotton filled the silence, a sound that reminded me of Sunday mornings when Rose would iron my shirts while humming hymns she half remembered from childhood. I pressed every crease with the meticulous attention I used to align a critical weld joint. Perfect edges. No wrinkles. No evidence of the man who had been living on oatmeal and darkness for 3 years. Then I went to the closet for my tie. Rose's tie. The deep navy silk she had bought me for our 30th anniversary. The box was dusty, sitting on the top shelf behind a stack of old tax returns. When I lifted the lid, my breath stopped. A small yellowed slip of paper sat folded on top of the silk. Rose's handwriting. I had never seen this note before. It must have been placed there years ago, tucked inside like a time capsule waiting for exactly this moment. "I married the strongest man in Pittsburgh. Never forget that, Georgie. You carry more weight than steel ever could." I stood in my bedroom holding that slip of paper, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Not confidence exactly. Something more fundamental. A grounding. As if Rose had reached across 5 years of absence and pressed her palm against my spine the way she used to when I came home, defeated after a bad day on the job. "Stand up straight, Georgie. You earned your place." I knotted the tie with hands that trembled only slightly. I checked my reflection one final time. I looked like a man going to a gala. Not a wealthy man. Not a powerful man. But a clean, dignified man who had nothing to hide and nothing to prove except that he existed and that his existence mattered. Then I checked the gas gauge on my truck and felt the hope deflate slightly. The needle sat below a quarter tank. Not enough to make it to Manhattan and back. I checked my wallet. A $20 bill. My last. I drove to the station on Butler Street and pumped exactly $20 of fuel into the tank, watching the numbers climb with the slow inevitability of a countdown. It left me with 0 cash. 0 margin. 0 safety net for a 5-hour drive into a city that had never once been kind to men like me. I pulled out of the driveway at 3 in the afternoon, Rose's note pressed against my chest beneath the ironed shirt, the invitation in my jacket pocket. Pittsburgh disappeared behind me, then the Pennsylvania Turnpike, then the endless corridor of New Jersey, and finally the Lincoln Tunnel swallowing my truck into the belly of Manhattan. By the time I emerged on the other side, the snow was falling thick against my windshield, and the Sky Prism Tower glowed on the horizon like a pillar of cold fire, 94 stories of glass and ambition, reaching toward a sky that did not care who built it. I sat in my truck 2 blocks away, watching the guests arrive in black cars that cost more than my house. Rose's note against my heart. My last hope inside that building. I did not know it yet. But I was not driving toward reconciliation. I was driving toward the longest night of my life. I was 2 blocks from the Sky Prism entrance when the sound found me. Not a crash. Not the clean, decisive snap of something breaking all at once. It was a groan. A long, low, metallic surrender that rose from somewhere to my left like the dying breath of a giant made of iron. Then the crash came. And it was not small. The clock on my dashboard read 8:15. The gala started at 9. I had 45 minutes to park, walk to the entrance, present my VIP pass, and stand before my daughter looking like a man who deserved to be in the room. 45 minutes to prove that George Kowalski was more than a stain on the Mercer narrative. I should have kept driving. Every logical circuit in my brain told me to stay in the truck, find a parking spot, and protect the ironed shirt and the navy tie and the shred of dignity I had left. But a welder does not hear structural failure and keep walking. Not after 40 years. Not ever. I was out of the cab before I finished the thought. My boots hitting the wet pavement in a sprint toward the sound. The snow was falling hard now, thick flakes that turned the streetlights into fuzzy halos and muffled the city's usual roar into something almost peaceful. But there was nothing peaceful about what I found around the corner of 34th Street. A construction site, 3 stories of scaffolding, had partially collapsed against the side of a half-finished residential tower. Steel pipes and wooden planks hung at grotesque angles, suspended by cables that were singing with tension, the high-pitched whine of metal being asked to hold more than it was designed to carry. Dust and snow mixed in the air, creating a gray fog that tasted of concrete and cold iron. 2 voices. Somewhere in the wreckage. One screaming. One quiet. Which was worse? Help. Please. Someone help us. The screaming voice belonged to a young man, maybe mid-20s, pinned at the waist beneath a cross brace that had folded like a broken arm. His hard hat was gone. His face streaked with blood from a cut above his eyebrow. His eyes found mine through the dust. Wide and white, with the kind of terror that erases all pretense. "How many of you?" I shouted, already scanning the debris field with eyes trained to read structural failure the way a doctor reads an X-ray. 2. My partner Danny is under the decking. He is not answering. "Please, sir. Please." I found Miguel first because he was visible. 24 years old, I would learn later. A laborer from Queens, working overtime to save for his mother's surgery. The cross-brace pinning him was resting on a secondary support beam that was itself only held by a single cable connector. If that connector failed, the brace would drop another 8 inches and crush his pelvis. "I need you to stay perfectly still," I told him, my voice shifting into the calm, commanding tone that 40 years of high-risk work had drilled into my nervous system. "I am going to stabilize this beam before I move you. Do not shift your weight. Do not try to help. Just breathe." I scanned the immediate area for anything I could use as a lever or a brace. A 4-foot section of intact scaffolding pipe lay nearby. I grabbed it, wedged it beneath the cross brace at an angle that distributed the load away from Miguel's body, and kicked a loose concrete block into position as a fulcrum. Basic physics. The same principles that let me stabilize cracked trusses 200 feet in the air applied identically at ground level. The pipe groaned as I leaned my full weight into it. The cross brace lifted. 2 inches. 3. Enough. Miguel scrambled backward, screaming as his bruised ribs protested the movement. But free. Alive. Where is Danny? I was already moving deeper into the debris. Miguel pointed with a shaking hand toward a tangle of collapsed decking panels near the base of the building. I climbed over twisted steel and splintered wood, my iron shirt catching on a jagged bolt that tore a 6-inch gash across my chest. I did not notice. The sharp metallic scent of my own warm blood mixed with the cold smell of snow and rust, but adrenaline had turned my body into a machine that only recognized one input: find the quiet one. Danny was underneath 2 overlapping deck panels, face down, his body folded into a space barely large enough for a dog. 22 years old, unconscious but breathing, his back rising in shallow, stuttering rhythms that told me he had minutes, not hours. The panels were pinned by a vertical pipe that had driven itself into the frozen ground like a spear. I could not lift it alone. Not at this angle. But I could cut it. My truck. I carried a portable arc welder in the bed for emergency field repairs. I sprinted back, my dress shoes sliding on the icy pavement, and grabbed the unit along with my emergency kit. Back at the debris in 90 seconds, I struck the arc against the vertical pipe, the blinding white flash cutting through the snow-filled dark like a star being born at street level. Sparks rained down onto my shirt, my jacket, my forearms. Each one a small burning kiss that ate through the fabric. Rose's note was pressed beneath. I did not stop. The cut took 45 seconds. The pipe fell away. I hauled the deck panels sideways with a strength that came from somewhere deeper than muscle, and pulled Danny free by his belt. He coughed, opened his eyes, looked at me like I was something sent from very far away. A foreman arrived then, running from the site office with a phone pressed to his ear. "EMTs are 3 minutes out," he shouted. Then stopped, staring at me. "Who the hell are you?" "Just a welder," I said, laying Danny carefully onto a flat section of decking. "Keep him still. Do not let him move his neck until the paramedics check his spine." The foreman pressed a business card into my hand. His eyes were wet. "Sir, I do not know how to thank you. You just saved those boys." I looked down at myself for the first time. My white shirt was destroyed. Metal dust, blood, hydraulic fluid, burn holes, concrete powder. The navy tie Rose had chosen with such care was streaked with a gray smear of scaffolding grease. My jacket was torn at the shoulder and blackened across the chest where sparks had eaten through. I smelled like a forge after a 12-hour burn. Everything I had spent the morning preparing, the haircut, the ironing, the careful knotting of silk, was gone, consumed by the same fire that had defined my entire life. I checked my watch. 8:47. 13 minutes until the gala began. I stood in the falling snow, 2 blocks from the Sky Prism, holding a business card in one hand and the ruins of my dignity in the other. I had a choice: drive 5 hours back to Pittsburgh with my appearance intact and my daughter's door still closed, or walk into that tower looking exactly like the man Tristan had always told everyone I was. A dirty old fool in steel-toe boots. Ever notice how the moments that define your life never come with enough time to think them through? I had 13 minutes, and a decision that should not have been difficult but felt like choosing between 2 different kinds of death. I buttoned my ruined jacket, tasted the metal dust on my lips, and walked toward the light of the Sky Prism lobby. I chose Sophie. The lobby security guard looked at me the way you look at something that has crawled out of a drain. I held up the VIP pass, with hands still trembling from pulling Danny free. He examined it for a long time, his eyes moving between the gold-embossed card and the wreckage of my appearance. He made a phone call, waited, then gestured toward the express elevator with the reluctance of a man releasing a hazard into a sterile environment. The ride to 94 took 38 seconds. The elevator was mirrored on all sides, which meant I could not escape my own reflection. Burn holes in my jacket, Danny's blood on my collar, concrete dust turning my hair from silver to ash. I tried to wipe my face with my sleeve, but the sleeve was worse than my face. I let the mirrors judge me from every angle. When the doors opened, I stepped into a wall of light and fragrance and the immediate sensation of being wrong. Every molecule of air on that observation deck was curated. Temperature, controlled, scented with something floral and expensive. 200 people who had spent more on their outfits than I had earned in 6 months. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan like a painting. Only the chosen were permitted to view. I took 3 steps before the whispers started. They moved through the crowd like a current, invisible but powerful enough to change the direction of everything. Sophie found me before I found her. She cut through the crowd with the urgent precision of someone intercepting a disaster before it reaches the cameras. Her hand clamped on my forearm with a force that would leave bruises. "Dad, what happened to you?" Her eyes were not searching my face for injury. They were scanning the room for witnesses. "There was a scaffolding collapse, Sophie. 2 blocks from here. 2 young men were trapped. I pulled them out. I did not have time to change. I do not care about scaffolding." She hissed, her nails digging deeper. "Tristan's entire board is here. Bloomberg is filming. I told them you were sick. Please, Dad, take the service elevator down. I will call you tomorrow." Have you ever heard your own child tell you that your existence is an emergency she needs to contain? That is what Sophie's voice sounded like. Not concern, Damage control. Before I could respond, the room shifted. Tristan Mercer materialized from the crowd, flanked by two men in suits that cost more than my truck. His eyes locked onto me with the cold focus of a targeting system. "Well," he said the word like opening a verdict. "I see the service entrance has failed us again." His voice rose to performance volume, designed to carry to every microphone in the vicinity. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. It appears we have a visitor who confused our grand opening with a salvage yard." He paused, surveying the crowd. "This is my father-in-law, a manual laborer from Pittsburgh, a welder. He builds things with fire and hammers. Very romantic, very last century." Richard Holt, the CEO of Holt Development Group, stepped forward. "Tristan, perhaps this is not the moment." Tristan waved him silent. "No, Richard. Our guests deserve an explanation for why a steel mill has just entered our billion-dollar showcase." He turned back to me, eyes gleaming with 4 years of sharpened cruelty. "This dirty old fool should not be here. He does not understand our world. He understands grunt labor and the inside of furnaces that civilized society left behind a century ago." Something broke inside me. Not the way glass breaks. The way a weld breaks, under sustained thermal stress. Slowly, then all at once. Danny's blood was still on my collar from saving a life 30 minutes ago, and my son-in-law was calling me a fool for the very skills that had just pulled 2 boys from a steel grave. I raised my voice. Not shouting, just loud enough to reach the microphones I knew were recording. $55,000, Tristan." The room went silent. Instantly, like someone had pulled the plug on the atmosphere. $55,000 of my retirement fund. My daughter asked me for it 3 years ago. "For your studio investment." Except it was not for your firm, was it? It was a down payment on a Tribeca penthouse. My overtime. My knees. My dead wife's engagement ring. "You are wearing my life savings on your wrist, and you stand here calling me a fool." Tristan's face shifted from performative disgust to something raw. Sophie grabbed my arm. "Dad, stop. It was a gift. You gave it freely. Please, do not do this here." She was trying to erase the debt in real time, sacrificing my survival to save a tuxedo. Richard Holt was staring at Tristan with new eyes. The board members had stopped drinking. The Bloomberg camera operator adjusted his angle. Tristan opened his mouth to deliver whatever lie he had prepared. But before a single word could form, the floor spoke first. It was not a sound any of those 200 guests would recognize. But I did. A low, subsonic groan that traveled up through 94 stories of structural steel and into the glass beneath our feet. The champagne in the nearest flute trembled. A woman's heel clicked oddly as the floor shifted beneath her by a degree invisible but not unfeelable. Every hair on my arms stood straight. My chest tightened with a recognition that bypassed thought and went straight to the 40-year archive of catastrophic failure stored in my bones. I had heard this frequency exactly twice in my career. Once on the Allegheny Bridge, 6 minutes before a beam cracked. Once on the Monongahela Crossing, 40 seconds before 16 tons of concrete dropped into the river. It was the sound of a load-bearing weld reaching its terminal limit. The sound of structural steel deciding it could no longer hold the lie it had been asked to carry. And it was coming from directly. The lobby security guard looked at me the way you look at something that has crawled out of a drain. I held up the VIP pass, with hands still trembling from pulling Danny free. He examined it for a long time, his eyes moving between the gold-embossed card and the wreckage of my appearance. He made a phone call, waited, then gestured toward the express elevator with the reluctance of a man releasing a hazard into a sterile environment. The ride to 94 took 38 seconds. The elevator was mirrored on all sides, which meant I could not escape my own reflection. Burn holes in my jacket. Danny's blood on my collar. Concrete dust turning my hair from silver to ash. I tried to wipe my face with my sleeve, but the sleeve was worse than my face. I let the mirrors judge me from every angle. When the doors opened, I stepped into a wall of light and fragrance, and the immediate sensation of being wrong. Every molecule of air on that observation deck was curated, temperature controlled, scented with something floral and expensive. 200 people who had spent more on their outfits than I had earned in 6 months. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan like a painting. Only the chosen were permitted to view. I took 3 steps before the whispers started. They moved through the crowd like a current. Invisible, but powerful enough to change the direction of everything. Sophie found me before I found her. She cut through the crowd with the urgent precision of someone intercepting a disaster before it reaches the cameras. Her hand clamped on my forearm with a force that would leave bruises. "Dad, what happened to you?" Her eyes were not searching my face for injury. They were scanning the room for witnesses. "There was a scaffolding collapse, Sophie. 2 blocks from here. 2 young men were trapped. I pulled them out. I did not have time to change. I do not care about scaffolding." She hissed, her nails digging deeper. "Tristan's entire board is here. Bloomberg is filming. I told them you were sick. Please, Dad, take the service elevator down. I will call you tomorrow. Have you ever heard your own child tell you that your existence is an emergency she needs to contain?" That is what Sophie's voice sounded like. Not concern. Damage control. Before I could respond, the room shifted. Tristan Mercer materialized from the crowd, flanked by 2 men in suits that cost more than my truck. His eyes locked onto me with the cold focus of a targeting system. "Well," he said the word like opening a verdict. "I see the service entrance has failed us again." His voice rose to performance volume, designed to carry to every microphone in the vicinity. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. It appears we have a visitor who confused our grand opening with a salvage yard." He paused, surveying the crowd. "This is my father-in-law, a manual laborer from Pittsburgh, a welder. He builds things with fire and hammers. Very romantic, very last century." Richard Holt, the CEO of Holt Development Group, stepped forward. "Tristan, perhaps this is not the moment." Tristan waved him silent. "No, Richard. Our guests deserve an explanation for why a steel mill has just entered our billion-dollar showcase." He turned back to me, eyes gleaming with 4 years of sharpened cruelty. "This dirty old fool should not be here. He does not understand our world. He understands grunt labor and the inside of furnaces that civilized society left behind a century ago." Something broke inside me. Not the way glass breaks. The way a weld breaks under sustained thermal stress. Slowly, then all at once. Danny's blood was still on my collar from saving a life 30 minutes ago. And my son-in-law was calling me a fool for the very skills that had just pulled 2 boys from a steel grave. I raised my voice. Not shouting. Just loud enough to reach the microphones I knew were recording. $55,000. Tristan. The room went silent. Instantly. Like someone had pulled the plug on the atmosphere. $55,000 of my retirement fund. My daughter asked me for it 3 years ago. For your studio investment. Except, it was not for your firm, was it? It was a down payment on a Tribeca penthouse. My overtime. My knees. My dead wife's engagement ring. You are wearing my life savings on your wrist, and you stand here calling me a fool. Tristan's face shifted from performative disgust to something raw. Sophie grabbed my arm. Dad, stop. It was a gift. You gave it freely. Please, do not do this here. She was trying to erase the debt in real time, sacrificing my survival to save a tuxedo. Richard Holt was staring at Tristan with new eyes. The board members had stopped drinking. The Bloomberg camera operator adjusted his angle. Tristan opened his mouth to deliver whatever lie he had prepared. But before a single word could form, the floor spoke first. It was not a sound any of those 200 guests would recognize. But I did. A low, subsonic groan that traveled up through 94 stories of structural steel and into the glass beneath our feet. The champagne in the nearest flute trembled. A woman's heel clicked oddly as the floor shifted beneath her by a degree invisible but not unfeelable. Every hair on my arms stood straight. My chest tightened with a recognition that bypassed thought and went straight to the 40-year archive of catastrophic failure stored in my bones. I had heard this frequency exactly twice in my career. Once on the Allegheny Bridge, 6 minutes before a beam cracked. Once on the Monongahela crossing, 40 seconds before 16 tons of concrete dropped into the river. It was the sound of a load-bearing weld reaching its terminal limit. The sound of structural steel deciding it could no longer hold the lie it had been asked to carry. And it was coming from directly beneath 200 pairs of designer shoes, 94 stories above the earth. The emergency stairwell between 94 and 93 was not locked. Margaret had known it would not be. The containment protocol sealed horizontal exits, not vertical maintenance shafts. She handed me a keycard from her coat pocket without explanation, and I took the stairs 2 at a time, my steel-toe boots ringing against the metal treads like a countdown. Sublevel 93 was not a floor designed for guests. It was the skeleton, the mechanical layer where the building's true anatomy lived, hidden beneath the glass and the marble and the billion-dollar views. When I pushed through the fire door, the air hit me like a wall. Hot, dense, smelling of machine oil and the sharp ozone tang of overheated electrical systems. Emergency red lights pulsed in slow rhythm, casting everything in the color of a warning nobody had heeded. The space was a cathedral of steel. Massive I-beams rose from the concrete floor to the ceiling, like the ribs of a prehistoric beast, each one carrying a portion of the 94th floor's impossible weight. Between them ran the primary truss system, a lattice of welded joints that distributed the load of the observation deck across 12 anchor points. It was elegant engineering, or it should have been. I smelled it before I saw it. The sharp, acrid signature of metal under thermal stress. Not burning exactly, but heating in a way that structural steel should never heat under normal load conditions. I followed my nose the way I had followed it through 1,000 dark crawl spaces over 4 decades, past the secondary support beams, past the HVAC conduits, until I reached the primary truss junction at the building's central spine. What I found made my stomach drop to the concrete floor. The welds were wrong. Not subtly wrong. Fundamentally wrong. The bead pattern was inconsistent, too shallow in critical load zones, with visible undercut along the fusion line. But worse than the workmanship was the metal itself. I ran my thumb along the joint surface and felt a texture I recognized immediately. The grain was too coarse. The color under stress was wrong. This was not American structural-grade steel. This was cheap imported material, the kind rated for interior framing, not load-bearing trusses. 94 stories above Manhattan. Have you ever discovered that the foundation of something beautiful was built on a lie so fundamental that the beauty itself becomes an accusation? That is what I was looking at. A billion-dollar tower held together by bargain steel and prayers. I counted the compromised joints. 7. 7 critical connection points where the primary truss met the anchor beams, and every single one was showing stress fractures that radiated from the weld line like cracks in ice. The oscillation I had felt upstairs was these joints flexing under a load they were never designed to carry. And with 200 people standing on the glass above, the additional dynamic load of panic, of running, of surging crowds, was accelerating the failure exponentially. 20 minutes. Maybe less. That was my calculation. 20 minutes before one of these joints let go entirely, and the observation deck experienced what engineers politely call a progressive collapse. I did not have a polite word for 200 people falling 94 stories. Footsteps behind me. A young man in a black polo shirt appeared in the red light, his face pale and sheened with sweat. Jason Park, 28. One of the engineering team from upstairs. He was holding a tablet that glowed with meaningless green status indicators. Sir. The structural monitoring system shows all joints within normal parameters. His voice was shaking. The AI says the building is stable. I pointed at the fracture line running 6 inches along joint number 3. Does that look stable to you, son? He stared. His tablet hand dropped to his side. Computers do not smell ozone, I said. I do. I need you to find me the emergency welding kit. Building code requires one on every mechanical level. Go. Now. He ran. I stripped off my ruined jacket and rolled up what remained of my sleeves. The emergency kit was mounted on the far wall behind a fire extinguisher station. Jason returned with it in 40 seconds, his hands trembling so badly the metal case rattled like a box of bones. I opened it. Portable MIG unit. Spool of filler wire. Auto-darkening helmet. Work gloves rated to 800 degrees. It was standard emergency equipment. Maintained, but never used. Tonight it was going to earn its existence. I started with joint 1. The most critical. The one showing the deepest fracture. I cleaned the surface with a wire brush, removing the oxidation layer to expose fresh metal. Then, I struck the arc. The world narrowed to a single point of blinding white light. In that light, there was no Tristan. No humiliation. No $55,000. No daughter who had erased my name. There was only the metal and the wire and the steady rhythmic pulse of my hand laying filler into the gap between failure and survival. I had done this 10,000 times in 4 decades, but never with 200 lives hanging directly above my head. Joint 1 sealed. I moved to joint 2. The fracture here was lateral, running along the heat-affected zone where the original weld had been too cold. I ground it out and re-welded with proper penetration, feeling the filler metal fuse with the base material in the way that tells an experienced welder the bond will hold. Not because a computer says so, because the metal speaks. Joint 3, 4, 5. Each one a conversation between my hands and the steel. Each one a small prayer, answered in sparks and heat. The sweat ran into my eyes, and I could not wipe it because my gloves were carrying 800 degrees of radiant heat. I blinked through the salt sting and kept moving. Joint 6. My left glove tore on a sharp edge of exposed rebar. I felt the heat immediately. The searing kiss of superheated metal against bare skin. I did not stop. I could not stop. I pressed my naked palm against the joint to feel the vibration, reading the steel the way a doctor reads a pulse through fingertips. The pain was a white noise that I filed somewhere behind the only thought that mattered. Hold. You will hold. Joint 7. The last. The deepest crack. Running nearly 8 inches along the primary fusion line. This was the one that would have gone first. This was the joint that was minutes from letting go when the champagne glass started sliding across the table upstairs. I laid the final bead with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. Slow. Even. Full penetration into the root. I watched the puddle flow into the crack and solidify with the dull red glow of metal, accepting its new reality. The arc went dark. The silence that followed was absolute. No groaning. No vibration. No oscillation traveling up through the structure, like a heartbeat, losing rhythm. Just the steady, solid hum of steel that had decided to hold. I sat on the concrete floor, my back against the beam I had just saved. My hands were raw, blistered. The left palm carried a burn in the shape of a weld joint that would scar permanently. My shirt was beyond description. My lungs ached from the welding fumes, but the steel held. 200 souls above me would never know how close they had come to falling through 94 stories of cheap metal and expensive lies. Then I heard them. Footsteps. Not one pair. Dozens. Coming down the emergency stairwell, with the determined rhythm of people who had been told exactly where to go. And at the front of them, the sharp, measured click of a woman's heels that sounded like a judge approaching the bench. Margaret Chen came through that fire door like a verdict walking on 2 legs. Behind her, A procession that would have been comical under different circumstances. Richard Holt, his tie loosened and his face the color of old paper. 3 board members whose names I did not know, but whose expressions all said the same thing. 2 uniformed NYPD officers, their radios crackling with static. And behind them all, a man with a shoulder-mounted camera whose red recording light blinked like a heartbeat in the dark. The Bloomberg cameraman. Still filming. Still live. Margaret's heels stopped 3 feet from where I sat on the concrete floor. She looked down at me, then up at the 7 joints I had just re-welded, each one still glowing with the faint cherry red of cooling metal. Her face was unreadable for exactly 2 seconds. Then something shifted behind her eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. Confirmation. "Show me," she said. I pulled myself to my feet, ignoring the scream in my left palm where the burn had already begun to blister into something permanent. I walked her to joint 3, the one with the most visible evidence. I pointed with my ruined hand at the original weld bead, still visible beside my emergency repair. "This is the original," I said. "See the undercut along the fusion line? The inconsistent penetration? The bead is too narrow for a load-bearing application. And the base metal." I scraped my thumbnail across the exposed surface. "Feel the grain. This is not structural grade. This is interior framing material. Rated for walls and partitions. Not for carrying the dynamic load of a glass observation deck 94 stories above ground." Margaret ran her finger along the surface. Her jaw tightened. She turned to Jason, who was standing behind the group, looking like a man watching his career evaporate. "Mr. Park, pull up the original material specifications from the construction contract. Display them on your tablet." Now, Jason's fingers moved across the screen with the frantic speed of someone who has just realized which side of history he needs to be on. The tablet glowed blue in the red emergency light, displaying 2 columns of data. On the left, the contracted specifications. American structural steel, grade 50, certified and inspected. On the right, the field test readings Jason had just taken from my exposed joint. Chinese interior grade. 14 gauge. No inspection certificate on file. The silence in that mechanical room was heavier than the beams above us. Margaret turned to the Bloomberg camera. "Make sure you are getting this," she said. "Every frame." Then she walked toward the stairwell. "We are going back upstairs." The 94th floor had transformed in my absence. The panic had been contained but not eliminated. Guests clustered in groups near the interior walls, their champagne abandoned, their phones pressed to their ears. The emergency barriers had retracted once Margaret's keycard overrode the containment protocol from below, but the atmosphere was still charged with the residual electricity of 200 people who had just confronted their own mortality. Tristan stood near the bar, surrounded by 3 men in dark suits who were clearly his legal team, summoned by phone during the crisis. His face was a mask of controlled damage, the expression of a man constructing a narrative in real time. When he saw Margaret emerge from the stairwell, followed by the board and the police and the camera, his mask cracked along every fault line. Margaret did not go to the podium. She did not ask for attention. She simply stopped in the center of the observation deck, and the room fell silent around her, with the gravitational certainty of planets orbiting a sun. 19 minutes ago, she began, her voice carrying without amplification. This building attempted to kill everyone in this room. She let the sentence hang. The only sound was the soft whir of the Bloomberg camera. It failed because of one man, a man who was called a dirty old fool on this very floor less than an hour ago. A man whose hands were the only thing standing between 200 people and a 94-story fall. She turned toward me. I stood there in my destroyed shirt, my burned hands hanging at my sides, suddenly visible in a way I had not been visible in 5 years. George Kowalski, she continued, is not a stranger to me. 20 years ago, his union submitted structural certification documents for a project I was funding on the Allegheny River. His name was on every critical weld inspection. When I purchased this building's development rights 3 years ago, I requested his file specifically. I wanted to know whose hands had built the spine of my investment. She paused. The hands on that file were not the hands that welded this building. Someone substituted the steel. Someone cut the budget. Someone decided that 200 lives were worth less than a profit margin. Every eye in the room moved to Tristan. He stepped forward, his hands raised in the universal gesture of manufactured innocence. Leonora, Margaret, whatever your name is, this is a minor calibration issue. My team was handling it before your dramatic entrance. I assure you, the structural integrity— Mr. Park, Margaret interrupted, without looking at Tristan. Play the footage from the private security camera mounted on Pillar 7. Timestamp 9:03 p.m. Jason hesitated. Then his fingers moved across the tablet. A screen behind the bar flickered to life, and the room watched. It was Tristan's own camera, the one he had positioned to capture what he intended to be a viral moment of George Kowalski being expelled from his building. But the camera had kept recording after the crisis began, and in the chaos, while George was descending to sublevel 93, Tristan had been captured in the frame, screaming at his engineering team with the unhinged desperation of a man watching his lies collapse in real time. His voice filled the observation deck. Tinny from the recording, but unmistakable. I cut the steel budget by 40%. Nobody was supposed to inspect the primary truss after installation. It was rated for static load only. Who authorized a live event with dynamic crowd loading? This was supposed to be a soft opening first. The recording played for 11 seconds. It was enough. 11 seconds that contained a confession, an admission of criminal negligence, and the complete annihilation of a career built on glass and vanity. The NYPD officers moved before Tristan finished processing what had just happened. The taller one spoke in a flat, procedural voice that carried no emotion. Tristan Mercer, you are under arrest for criminal negligence, reckless endangerment, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. The handcuffs closed around his wrists with a metallic click that echoed across the observation deck like a period at the end of a very long sentence. The Bloomberg camera captured every frame, every angle, every micro-expression on Tristan's face as the architect of a billion-dollar tower was led away in steel restraints by men who understood that real authority does not need a glass floor to stand on. Vanessa Mercer materialized from the crowd, her face twisted with a calculation that prioritized survival over loyalty. I had nothing to do with the construction decisions, she announced to no one in particular. Julian made those choices independently. I was strictly advisory. She was sacrificing her own son before the elevator doors closed behind him. I watched it happen and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just the heavy, tired weight of a man who had seen too much truth in one evening to feel anything as simple as victory. Margaret turned back to me. The camera was still rolling. 200 guests were still watching. And my daughter was somewhere behind me, though I could not bring myself to look. The handcuffs caught the emergency light as the officers guided Tristan toward the service elevator, the only lift Margaret had unlocked for their exit. His wrists looked wrong in steel. Too thin, too smooth, like the restraints had been designed for men with rougher hands than his. He passed within 6 feet of me, close enough that I could smell the panic sweat cutting through his $1,200 cologne. And for one brief second, his eyes met mine. There was no defiance left in them. No cruelty. No calculation. Just the hollow recognition of a man who has finally run out of floor to stand on. He looked at my burned hands, at the blisters already swelling across my left palm, and I watched something shift behind his pupils. Not remorse. Understanding. The belated, useless understanding that the man he had called a dirty old fool was the only reason he was being led to a police car instead of a morgue. He said nothing. The elevator doors closed, and Tristan Mercer disappeared from the 94th floor for the last time. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds before Richard Holt stepped forward. His voice was tight, clipped, operating in the register of a CEO performing emergency surgery on his own reputation. He addressed Margaret with the careful precision of a man standing on a ledge. Mrs. Chen, on behalf of Holt Development Group, I want to assure you that we had no knowledge of material substitution in the structural phase. Our oversight was limited to the design and marketing. Margaret raised one hand. The gesture was small, almost casual, but it stopped Richard mid-sentence as effectively as a wall. Your firm selected Tristan Mercer as lead architect and structural contractor. Your firm approved the budget reductions he proposed. Your due diligence failed at every checkpoint that mattered. She turned to face him fully. Pacific Rim Development's $400 million investment in this project was contingent on certified structural integrity. That certification is now fraudulent. My legal team will be in contact by morning. Richard's face aged 10 years in 3 seconds. He nodded once, turned, and retreated toward his legal counsel without another word. The board members scattered like pigeons, disturbed by a passing truck. Within minutes, the observation deck had emptied of everyone with a title and a liability, leaving only the catering staff, the Bloomberg crew still recording, and the ghosts of a party that had died somewhere between the first groan of failing steel and the click of handcuffs. Margaret turned back to me. The red emergency lighting had given way to the building's backup generators, casting everything in a flat, honest fluorescence that revealed every stain on my shirt and every line on her face. She studied me for a moment, her blue eyes carrying a weight that went deeper than tonight. How do your hands feel, Mr. Kowalski? I looked down at them. The left was a topography of blisters and raw pink skin. The right was stained black, with welding residue, and someone else's blood. They were the ugliest things in the room. They were also the only things in the room that had saved 200 lives. They feel like they have been doing this for 40 years, I said. She almost smiled. Then she spoke with the directness of a woman who had built a $30 billion empire by never wasting a sentence. I do not need architects, Mr. Kowalski. I do not need visionaries or disruptors, or men who build cathedrals out of spreadsheets and lies. I need someone who understands that a building is only as honest as the hands that weld its spine. She reached into her coat and produced a card. Heavy stock, gold embossed, a phoenix logo I did not yet understand. I want you as Chief Welding Inspector for Pacific Rim Development Group. Every project in our portfolio, 47 properties across North America. You will have final authority on structural certification. No beam gets approved without your hands on the metal. I stared at the card. The title, printed beneath the phoenix, was not real to me yet. It belonged to a version of George Kowalski that existed only in theory. Mrs. Chen, I am just a welder from Lawrenceville. I do not sit in boardrooms. No. She agreed. You sit under buildings while everyone else runs away. That is precisely why I need you. In the room where decisions are made. She placed the card in my burned palm with a gentleness that acknowledged the damage without pitying it. The salary will be discussed Monday. But I should mention that my legal team has already filed for recovery of stolen funds. $55,000, plus interest. Mercer's assets are being frozen as we speak. You will have your money back within 72 hours. 72 hours. 3 days to recover what had taken me 40 years to earn and 3 years to grieve. I closed my fingers around the card, feeling the textured stock against my blistered skin, and realized that for the first time in 5 years, someone with power had looked at my hands and seen something other than a liability. Have you ever received something you deserved but had stopped believing would ever come? It is not joy. Not exactly. It is more like a bone resetting. After being broken for so long you forgot it was supposed to be straight. It hurts. It relieves. It terrifies. All at once. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I said it simply because anything more would have cracked the composure I was barely maintaining. Margaret nodded, then looked past me toward something near the eastern windows. Her expression shifted from authority to something softer, something almost maternal. Go to her, Mr. Kowalski. She needs you more than I do right now. I turned. And there she was. Sophie was not standing with the board members or the legal team or the departing guests. She was alone. Completely alone. Sitting on the floor near the cracked glass panel with her silk dress pooled around her like a deflated parachute. Her knees were pulled to her chest. Her face was buried in her hands. And her shoulders were shaking with the silent, convulsive rhythm of someone who has just watched every wall they built collapse into rubble. I had just been handed the keys to a kingdom I never asked for. A title, a salary, justice, vindication. The respect of a woman who commanded $30 billion with a single raised hand. But standing on that glass floor, watching my daughter fall apart alone in the corner, I realized none of it mattered. Not really. Not compared to the only thing I had ever truly wanted. I took a step toward her. Then another. My burned hands open at my sides. Not reaching yet. Just available. The way a foundation is available to the house above it. Silent. Patient. Ready to hold whatever weight decides to come home. She did not hear me coming. The observation deck was nearly empty now. The last catering staff clearing abandoned champagne flutes, with the quiet efficiency of people trained to be invisible during other people's catastrophes. The backup generators hummed overhead, casting a flat white light that was honest in the way emergency lighting always is. No mood. No flattery. Just truth. Sophie was curled against the base of the eastern window, the one with the spiderweb crack running through its center. Her silk dress was wrinkled beyond recovery. Her heels had been kicked off and lay on their sides 3 feet away like casualties of a retreat. Mascara tracked down her cheeks in dark rivulets that had dried and re-wet and dried again, mapping the timeline of a grief that had started before the handcuffs and would continue long after. I lowered myself to the glass floor beside her. My knees protested, the left one making a sound like gravel shifting in a pipe. I did not speak. I just sat. Close enough for her to feel my presence, far enough to give her the space to choose. It took her 40 seconds to look up. When she did, her eyes were the eyes of the girl I had raised. Not the polished executive. Not the Mercer brand ambassador. Not the woman who had outsourced my existence to an automated reply system. Just Sophie, red-eyed and broken, and looking at her father like he was the last solid thing in a world that had just proven itself to be made entirely of glass. Daddy. The word came out cracked and raw, a sound she had not made in 3 years. I do not know how to begin to say what I need to say. I waited. A welder learns patience from the metal. You cannot rush a joint into fusion. You cannot force bonding. You can only hold the heat steady and let the material decide when it is ready to flow. She pressed her palms against her eyes, as if trying to push the tears back to wherever they came from. Everything he told me. Everything I believed. That you were holding me back. That my past was a weight I needed to cut. That being a Kowalski was something to hide from. She dropped her hands, and her face was a ruin of expensive makeup and honest anguish. I believed him, Dad. I chose him over you. Every single time. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed blue between us, and I opened my call history. The list was long. Longer than any daughter should ever have to see. Do you know how many times I called you in the last 3 months, Sophie? She shook her head. A small, terrified movement. 37 times. I scrolled slowly, letting her see each entry. March 15th. I called to tell you, I saw Lily's school photo on your assistant's public page. You sent it to voicemail. Her hand flew to her mouth. March 22nd. Your birthday. I called at 7 in the morning. You declined at 7:01. Dad, please. April 3rd. I called to ask if I could send Lily a card for Easter. No answer. No callback. April 19th. I called because the roof was leaking, and I wanted to hear your voice while I fixed it alone. Voicemail. May 11th. Mother's Day. I called because it is the hardest day of the year without Rose, and I thought maybe you would understand that. You texted me at 11:40 that night. One word. Busy. Sophie was openly sobbing now, her body folding forward with each entry like she was being struck. I did not stop. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because the truth needed air the way a weld needs shielding gas. Without it, the bond will always be contaminated. June, July, August. Every single one declined or ignored. September 3rd. Your birthday again. I sang to your voicemail. Did you know that? I sang the same song, Rose, and I used to sing when you were 5. To an empty recording that probably got deleted by your automated system before you ever heard it. Stop. She whispered it like a prayer. Please. Stop. I know what I did. I put the phone away. The blue light vanished, leaving us in the flat honesty of the emergency fluorescence. I looked at my daughter, at the streaked face and the shaking hands and the complete dissolution of the armor she had spent 4 years constructing, and I felt something I did not expect. Not anger. Not vindication. Grief. A deep, aching grief for the years we had both lost to a man who had just been led away in handcuffs. Why, Sophie? I kept my voice soft, not accusing, just asking. Why did you let him convince you I was something to be ashamed of? She looked at her hands. The manicured nails. The bare ring finger where Tristan's diamond had already been removed. Probably at the advice of whatever lawyer she had texted during the chaos. She was quiet for a long time before she answered. Because I was ashamed of where I came from. Not of you. Of Lawrenceville. Of the smell of the forge. Of being the girl whose dad showed up to school events with soot under his nails. When Tristan offered me a world without any of that, I grabbed it with both hands and never looked back. She met my eyes. He did not have to convince me very hard, Dad. That is the part that makes me sick. I was already halfway out the door before he even started pushing. Ever hear your own child admit that the distance between you was not just built by the villain but also chosen by the person you love? It is a truth that has no comfortable resting place. It sits in your chest like a hot rivet. Too fresh to touch, but impossible to ignore. I forgive you, Sophie. She looked up, her eyes wide with a disbelief that broke my heart. But I need you to understand something. I reached over and took her hands in mine, my blistered palms against her smooth fingers. Trust does not re-weld overnight. You broke something between us that was load-bearing, the kind of joint that holds everything else up. I can repair it. I have the hands for it. But it needs time, and heat, and pressure. And most importantly, it needs you to hold still long enough for the bond to form again. She nodded, tears running freely into the collar of her ruined dress. I will hold still, Daddy. I promise. I will hold still for as long as it takes. I pulled her into my chest then, my burned hands gentle on her shaking back, careful not to press too hard against bones that felt as fragile as the glass we were sitting on. She cried in a way I had not heard since she was 9 years old, and her hamster died, full body crying. The kind that empties you out completely, so that whatever fills you next has room to grow. We sat on that glass floor, 94 stories above a city that was still twinkling as if nothing had happened. 2 broken people deciding, for the first time in 5 years, that they would rather be broken together than whole apart. The glass beneath us held. I had made sure of that. 1 month later, a sound I had not heard in 5 years filled my Lawrenceville workshop. A child's laughter. High and bright and completely unaware of the years of silence it was shattering with every note. Sophie's Subaru pulled into the driveway on a Saturday morning in January. I stood on the porch, my hands freshly scrubbed but still carrying the permanent staining of a life spent with metal. I had been up since 5, sweeping the workshop floor, arranging tools on their pegboard hooks with a precision that had everything to do with controlling the shaking in my fingers. The back door opened, and Lily tumbled out like a small explosion of blonde curls and winter coat. She had Rose's chin, that stubborn jut that meant she had already made up her mind about the world. 5 years old. 5 years I had missed because someone decided I was too industrial for her aesthetic. Grandpa Georgie. She shouted it across the driveway, as if she had been saying it her whole life. Mommy says you build things with fire. I knelt on the cold concrete and opened my arms. She ran into them with the fearless velocity of a child who has not yet learned that trust can be broken. She hit my chest like a small, warm cannonball, and I held on. I do, little bird. Would you like to see? Sophie stood by the car wearing a simple wool coat over jeans. No designer silk, no pearl earrings. She looked like the daughter I remembered. Not entirely, but the woman walking toward me was walking toward me. Not away. That was enough. The workshop centerpiece sat on my main workbench beneath a canvas drop cloth. I had recovered the Phoenix 2 weeks after Sky Prism. Sophie found it in Tristan's storage unit, buried behind designer shoes. She drove it to Pittsburgh herself, set it on my kitchen table, looked at it, looked at me, and cried. I spent the month restoring it, repolishing feathers, replacing 2 burned bulbs. It was ready. Lily was already exploring the workshop, touching everything with unself-conscious curiosity. She picked up a ball-peen hammer. This is heavy, Grandpa. That is because it is real, little bird. Real things have weight. I pulled the canvas away. The Phoenix stood 18 inches tall, wings spread wide, every feather catching light with the precision of 3 months of sleepless labor. Lily's mouth formed a perfect circle. Is it for me? It has always been for you. I lifted her onto my hip. But the magic does not happen until you find the switch. Her fingers traced the tail feathers, the talons, the breast, until they found the tiny lever beneath the tail. She pressed. The Phoenix ignited. Golden light poured through every feather, every amber panel. Wings cast shadows on the walls like a sunrise born from steel. Lily gasped, then laughed, then gasped again. Grandpa, it is alive. There is something else hidden inside. Can you find the secret door? She searched until her fingers found the hinged panel disguised as a breast feather. She pulled out a photograph. Rose holding baby Sophie in this kitchen. Both of them laughing. Who is this pretty lady, Grandpa? That is your grandmother. Her name was Rose. She would have loved you. More than you can imagine. Lily looked at Sophie, who was leaning against the doorframe with tears running down her face. Mommy, you look so happy here. I was happy, sweet girl. Because Grandma Rose and Grandpa Georgie loved me so much. Just like we love you. That afternoon I taught Lily her first spark. A low amperage demonstration. Child-sized helmet and gloves. I guided her finger to the trigger. The tiny blue flash made her squeal. I made lightning, Grandpa. You made a spark, little bird. Sparks are how everything strong begins. Have you ever watched a child discover that creation lives in their own hands? It is the closest thing to witnessing a soul catch fire. In that moment, 3 generations of Kowalski ironworkers lived in one small finger pressing a trigger. Over the following weeks, the world recalibrated around truth. My first paycheck from Pacific Rim cleared in mid-January. A sum I read 3 times. Attached was a separate transaction. $55,000. Plus $8,000 in interest. Debt recovery. Mercer T. Every cent returned. The mortgage paid off by February. The heating bill caught up. Rose's kitchen filled with real cooking instead of single-serving survival. Sophie took a position as community liaison for Margaret Chen's Infrastructure Foundation. Honest work connecting development projects with neighborhoods like ours. No venture capital jargon. No aesthetic curation. Just building bridges between people who make things and people who need things made. In March, a glossy magazine arrived. Modern Infrastructure Quarterly. The cover showed me in my workshop, hands on structural steel, the Phoenix on the shelf behind me. The headline read, The Kowalski Standard. Why the Future of Smart Cities Depends on Master Hands. Page 43 detailed Tristan sentencing. 8 years federal. Criminal negligence. Fraud. Reckless endangerment. Architectural license revoked permanently. That same week, Vanessa and Richard Mercer's attorney contacted Sophie. They wanted to fund a trade scholarship, the Rose Kowalski Memorial Scholarship for young welders entering the field. I agreed to let them use her name. Not for Vanessa, for the 19-year-old kids who would one day stand on a scaffold and need to know their work matters. By spring, Lily's visits became weekly. Every Saturday morning, the same Subaru, the same blonde curls, the same voice echoing through my workshop. "Grandpa, teach me another spark." On my refrigerator door, held by a magnet shaped like a wrench, hung a drawing. Crayon on construction paper. A man with enormous red hands shooting yellow lightning from his fingers. Underneath, in crooked kindergarten letters, "Grandpa Georgie, hero with fire hands." It was the most honest assessment of my life's work I had ever received. And it was worth more than every title, every magazine cover, and every salary Margaret Chen could ever put on a business card. A 5-year-old saw what 200 elite guests could not. She saw the hero underneath the dust. On the first morning of the new year, I stood in my workshop before the sun came up and listened to the silence. Not the old silence. Not the kind that pressed against the walls like a weight designed to crush me. This was a different quiet, the kind that exists in a house where the furnace runs steady, where the mortgage is paid, and where a child's drawing on the refrigerator proves that someone in this world sees you clearly. I ran my hand along the workbench my grandfather built in 1952. The wood was worn smooth by 3 generations of Kowalski palms, each one leaving behind a layer of oil and labor that had become part of the grain itself. My tools hung on the pegboard in their proper places. The forge sat cold but ready, and on the shelf above my welding station, the phoenix glowed faintly in the pre-dawn dark, its amber light still burning from where Lily had pressed the switch during yesterday's visit and forgotten to turn it off. I did not turn it off either. Some lights are meant to stay on. I reached for my master welder's certification on the wall. The paper was 38 years old, framed in simple black wood beside Rose's photograph and Lily's drawing, and the magazine cover that still did not feel entirely real. I touched the glass over Rose's face and felt the familiar ache. Not sharp anymore. Not the raw, burning grief of those first years. Something softer. A warmth that lived in the same place the pain used to occupy, as if love had slowly filled the space that loss had carved. "You were right, Rosie." I whispered it to the photograph the way I always did. The foundation is everything. If the weld in the heart is not true, nothing above it can stand. By 9 o'clock, I was driving through the quiet Pittsburgh streets toward Polish Hill Cemetery. The snow from the night before had laid a clean white blanket over the graves, undisturbed except for a single set of footprints leading to Rose's headstone. Someone had been here before me. I knelt at the marker, brushing frost from the granite with my gloved hand. And there, resting against the base of the stone, was a small bouquet of winter jasmine, Rose's favorite. The stems were fresh, placed within the last few hours. Beside them, a folded note in Sophie's handwriting. "Mom, I am sorry it took me so long to come back. I am sorry I forgot who built me. I will not forget again. I love you. I love Dad. And Lily knows your name now. She says it every night before bed. Always, Sophie." I read it twice. Then I placed it back against the stone where it belonged. Some messages are not meant for me. They are meant for the conversation between a daughter and the mother she lost before she understood what she was losing. I pulled the magazine from my coat and set it against the headstone in a clear plastic sleeve. A final report for the woman who had been my North Star for 34 years. I told her everything. The rescue, the welds, Margaret's offer, the handcuffs on Tristan's wrists, the phoenix lighting up in Lily's hands, and the sound of a child calling me Grandpa, as if the word had always existed in her vocabulary, waiting for permission to be spoken. I believe God allowed this journey to happen for a reason. Not as punishment, not as some cosmic test of endurance, but as a lesson that took 5 years and a 94-story building to teach me. Character is not built in comfort. It is forged in the same fire that threatens to consume you. And the man who emerges from that fire, hands burned and shirt destroyed but spine intact, is the man who was always there beneath the dust. He just needed the world to go dark long enough for everyone else to finally see his light. I stood and looked out over the cemetery, the Pittsburgh skyline in the distance. Somewhere beyond those hills, 300 miles east, the Sky Prism Tower stood against the New York sky. Its aviation lights blinked red in the winter air. It was no longer a symbol of my exclusion. It was not a monument to Tristan's vanity. It was a building I had saved, a spine I had rewelded, a foundation I had made honest with my own hands. I climbed into my truck and checked my phone. 2 notifications. The first was a deposit alert. My quarterly inspection royalty from Pacific Rim Development, a number that would have seemed fictional to the man eating oatmeal alone in this kitchen 1 year ago. The second was a news alert. Mercer, T. Final sentencing confirmed. 8 years federal. No parole eligibility for 6. I set the phone down and started the engine. Happy New Year, Rosie. Watch over us. The drive home took 12 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway, the workshop light was still on. Lily's Phoenix still glowing on the shelf. And I realized that I was no longer afraid of the dark. Not because the dark had changed, but because I had spent 40 years learning to be the man who brings the light back, and no amount of glass towers or designer suits or billion-dollar lies could ever take that from me. Looking back now, I realized this story was never about revenge. It was never about money, or a building made of glass, or a son-in-law in handcuffs. It was about a truth that took me 63 years to understand. You cannot love someone into respecting you. You cannot sacrifice your way into being seen. And you cannot keep a promise to protect your daughter by allowing her to destroy you in the process. For years, I disappeared. I gave. I forgave. I waited. I told myself that patience was the same as strength. But patience without boundaries is not strength. It is erasure. And I thank God that He put me in that parking garage at exactly the right moment. Put those 2 workers in my path. And put me on that observation deck. Looking exactly like the man I was always meant to be. Not polished. Not curated. Just real. If you are listening to this story, hear me clearly. Do not confuse love with self-destruction. A parent can give everything and still lose if respect disappears from the equation. Set your boundaries early. Speak your truth early. And never, not for one moment, be ashamed of the work your hands do. The world needs men and women who build things, who fix things, who hold things together when everything above them is trying to fall apart. I believe God places us in the fire not to destroy us, but to show everyone else what we are made of. Strength is not measured by how much pain you carry in silence. It is measured by the courage to keep your fire burning when others are trying to put it out. And if you are a father or a mother who feels invisible right now, who feels erased by the people you sacrificed everything for, know this. Your hands matter. Your work matters. Your presence matters. And one day, someone small and honest will look at you and see exactly what you are. Not a ghost. Not a liability. Not a dirty old fool. A hero with fire hands. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. If this story touched something in your chest, please leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done standing on that glass floor. 94 stories up, with a choice between dignity and family. I truly want to hear your answer. And if you have not already, please subscribe so you do not miss the next story. God bless you all. Keep your fire burning.